Alright, welcome back to Revelation Time. We are in chapter 12 here with Shelter for Believers. Personally, my favorite chapter in the book of Revelation. There's a lot to look at here, a lot of exciting stuff to look at, a lot to understand. And so those of you that are in the VC, go ahead and, if you have not already, join us on the slideshow. Can somebody let me know if they can see the slides?
I can see it.
Okay, thank you, Logan. Alright, so we're in chapter 12, which I titled The Woman, the Child, and the Dragon. May I remind you, actually warn you, that there is a lot of symbolism in the chapter we're going to look at. But we can find most of it with references to Old Testament and parts of the New. And so we're going to do that the best we can and look as deep as we can into these things without straying from the scriptures, without straying from anything at all that's going to cause us to be hindered in our understanding. We're going to try to apply everything correctly as we go through this entire chapter tonight. Alright, we'll start off in verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. There is not a giant woman actually standing on the moon with the sun behind her. This is symbolic. Obviously symbolic. Now, what's the woman? There's a lot of different views on this. I'll give you a few of them. The ones that I know. Israel, church, Mary, and heavenly Jerusalem. That's the four I've heard. Okay? How do we know who this woman is? Look at the previous verse in verse 19 of the previous chapter of chapter 11, and look what this verse says. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. Well, what does that have to do with this woman, you may think? This verse is important because the Ark of the Testament, the Ark of the Covenant, is what it's referencing to. What does the Ark of the Covenant hold? The promises to Israel. That's important. Because chapter 12, verse 1, will reveal a woman, and we'll find out in verse 2 that she's pregnant. Now, first thought might be, well, it has to be Mary. But again, this is a symbolic scene. This is not a literal woman. She represents something bigger than what she may appear. Notice her description. Clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. To those of you that know the book of Genesis pretty well, this should not surprise you of what I'm getting ready to tell you. Genesis 37, verse 5 through 11. Joseph tells a dream to his father Jacob. And what does he tell him? He said, I saw 11 stars. Joseph's the 12th. He said, I saw 11 stars, and the sun and the moon bowing before me. Jacob interprets the dream. He says, do you mean to tell me that me and your mother and your brothers are going to bow before you? So Jacob affiliates himself with either the moon or the sun, and his wife with either the moon or the sun. So the moon and the sun in this vision represents the patriarchs of Israel. So who is the woman? Israel. What's the crown? The 12 tribes. They're described as stars. This isn't difficult. It's not the church. I'm sorry to those of you that may have been coming here expecting that. There's no way it's the church at all. It's impossible. And we're going to go through that as we go through this chapter and just prove it to you how impossible it is for this to be the church. And it has nothing to do with the pre-tribulation rapture either. There's plenty of proof beyond that. Way beyond that. Alright. Verse 2. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. Interesting. She's pregnant. What is the importance of this? Well, in Isaiah 26, Isaiah 54, Jeremiah 3, Micah 4 verses are listed on the screen for you, those of you in the VC. All represent symbolically that Israel is the spouse of God. But in Jeremiah, we kind of see in a certain chapter where he kind of gives her bill of divorcement because she's whoring on him. Now, that doesn't mean he's done with Israel. Definitely not. This chapter proves that Israel is still important to him. There's no replacement theology. That's a myth. Catholic Church created that. That is definitely not true. So who's the child that she's having? Well, we'll talk about that later. Some of you that are looking at the notes already kind of get an idea of what's going on here, but I'm going a little bit behind the scenes with it as well. So she is travailing, she's in pain. There's something inside her that needs to get out. She's suffering. Verse 3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. There is not a literal 7-headed dragon, perhaps. We know Satan can have many forms. But what does the dragon represent? Well, we'll get to that in the next chapter when we get to Daniel's visions. Not this chapter. Into all the parts of the identity of this dragon. The dragon is Satan. Verse 9 reveals that. No spoilers, really. Okay, so she's pregnant, and up shows up Satan. What's the importance? Why is he here? The next verse tells us. Verse 4. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and had cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Interesting. While he's standing in front of this woman, his tail reaches up into the heavens, pulls down some stars to the earth. Now remember, they're in heaven. He pulls them to the earth, casts them to the ground, and he stands before the woman waiting for the child to be born so he can devour it. Now, you may be wondering, wait, Sam, the book of Revelation is a future book. In other words, this is going to happen. There's going to be Israel's going to have a child or something? No. Wait. You have to remember, in heaven, there is no time. It's timeless. So when you see a scene that's in heaven, you can't say immediately that what's happening in heaven is happening on earth. Because heaven's different. When you're looking at a heavenly perspective, you look at the past to the future. What we're looking at is the past to the future. Notice that he drew the third part of the stars. What was that? A third of the angels of heaven rebelled against God, and what did they do? They made giants with the women of the earth. They left their first estate. That's in Jude and Peter talking about that. Jude 1:6 and Genesis 6:1-4. He wants to devour the child, and he casts these stars to the earth. The giants were born. And where did they go? After the flood, giants were born again. They were made anew by these angels and the rebellion. Well, where did the giants go? They went, of all places, they didn't go to China, they didn't go to Norway, they didn't go to Sweden. They went to the promised land and waited for the nation of Israel. Why? Because Satan was going to use these giants to prevent prophecy from being fulfilled. If the Messiah was born, the seed of the woman foretold in Genesis chapter 3, Satan's in trouble. He could not let this child be born, so he has to stop it. So he plans these giants and puts them literally in where Jerusalem's going to be built. In the Valley of the Giants, which is close by. He puts them there, headquarters them, right near Jerusalem, and they lie in wait for the nation of Israel. This is what verse 4 is talking about. It's from past to future. Verse 5. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God, unto God, and to his throne. This is interesting. Her child is destined to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Now, is the child symbolic, or is the child a literal person? I think that's pretty easy. It's a little person. Now, some have said that they went into the Greek and they found it's possible that the way John in the Greek describes the child, that the child is the church. I don't know about that. Because the child is, look at the verse, to rule all nations with a rod of iron. There's only one man, only one child that was promised to rule with a rod of iron. That is Christ. Revelation 2:27. But Satan doesn't get the child. You know why? He's caught up unto God and to his throne. That's in Acts chapter 1. That's the ascension. Satan fails to kill Jesus at the cross. He thinks he succeeds, but really he messes himself up, because when Jesus dies on the cross, he fulfills the law. Satan loses his position as the accuser of the brethren temporarily for a moment. He gets his head stomped pretty hard. His kingdom is bruised. Okay? So he's had a major setback. Very major setback. So what we see in Revelation chapter 12 from 1 to 5 is from Genesis 3 to Acts chapter 1. John just gave you a summary in the eyes of Israel and the eyes of heaven of everything that's happened since Genesis to Acts. Remember, heaven's timeless. Heavenly scenes, you can't say, well, this is happening exactly when this is happening on earth. Did you not look in the previous chapter whenever the angels and the people in heaven were saying that now is come the kingdoms of Christ? Now that they're his? They're not on earth yet. Why? There's 7 more vials for them to go through. There's more events for them to go through. So what's happening in heaven is not necessarily happening on the earth, because heaven is timeless. So for us right now, we know the tribulation period hasn't started. For us right now, above our heads in the spiritual realm, as we'll be looking at soon, there is a war going on that is not yet ended. But it's foretold that it will end. Verse 6. So the child is caught up. What does the woman do? Verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had the place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. 1,260 days. She hides in the wilderness, and it's possible that God may feed wandering Jews in the wilderness with manna from heaven. It's possible. Some great Bible teachers have taught that. So he's feeding the woman in the wilderness. Why the wilderness? The wilderness is a place of safety, discipline, and waiting. It's a place where Jesus went, was tempted of the devil. It's the place where Elijah went and recovered to his senses. It's the place where John the Baptist went to receive his ministry. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. It's a place of waiting and discipline. Verse 7. Here's the good part. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. All right. Verse 1 through 7 of this chapter. This is past. Verse 7 is present. Verse 6. Now, this is tribulation period. Verse 6. However, verse 7 may be something that's happening in the spiritual realm right now. But I'm not. But it's possible. Because the angels and the demons are constantly in a struggle. But one day the struggle will end. So technically, there is a war going on above our heads. That much is clear. Principalities and powers we wrestle against. Verse 8. And prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So this war is not going very good for Satan because he's losing. And he doesn't have any more place in heaven. You know what that means? He can't accuse the brethren of the law anymore. He's lost his place. And he has nowhere to go but the earth. That's in verse 9. He is permanently barred from heaven. This is future, not yet. He is permanently barred from heaven for good. He cannot stand up there before the throne of God and say, look what your child did here, look what your child did here, look what your child did here. He can't do that no more. He's lost it. He's been cast down. Michael, the mighty prince of the angels, the archangel, the prince protector of Israel, has won the battle. Verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. The dragon's identity is revealed, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He has 3 titles here. Let's look at all 3. It's very important. Each one tells us something about the devil. As a serpent, Ophis, he is called an artful, malicious person. As devil, Diabolos, he is called a traducer, one who attacks by slander or belittlement. As Satan, Satanas, he is the accuser. You can learn a lot from the titles of the devil and Jesus Christ and God the Father. You can learn about a lot from titles in Greek. As a serpent, he's malicious and very crafty. As the devil, he attacks with slander, and as Satan, he accuses. It's very important. Neither was a place found any more in heaven. Satan will have more than one fall. Now, in Luke 10:18, Jesus said he saw Satan fall like lightning. Past tense. So he's fell before. When? Probably after the crucifixion. But it's past tense. So when did he fall? Well, he fell somewhere around creation, Garden of Eden. Somewhere in there, it's not really explained. This is one of those things that a lot of debates float around when he first fell. All we know is he's going to fall again. I'm not going to get really too deep into that. I've not fully studied everything about that. That's a lot of ground to cover. But he fell sometime before that. Before Luke 10:18. Could have been after the garden. It's hard to tell. All right. John 12:31, when Jesus is talking about his crucifixion, he mentions that now the prince of this world will be cast out. Interesting. Now, what's he talking about? This is another one that we're unsure about, really. Maybe some of you that have done deeper, extensive research, maybe you can understand this better, but as for right now, I am not really sure. There's a lot of different verses to talk about this moment here, and we're going to have to go over them all eventually sometime. Whenever I have a lot of editing to do in this commentary, so it's going to take a while. A lot of editing, a lot of extra research I got to do, so it's going to be something. All right, verse 10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accuseth them before our God day and night. The prophecies of the fall of Satan have taken place. Zechariah chapter 3 and Isaiah chapter 14. Let's just take a look right quick at one of them. Let's go to Zechariah. Let's go to Zechariah right quick. Zechariah chapter 3. Let's read this one. It's very short. Verse 1 through 2. And he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. So this is in heaven. And the Lord said unto Satan, the Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? Satan accuses before the throne of God day and night. All right, now let's go to Isaiah 14 right quick. Isaiah 14, verse number 7. Let's take a look at this really quick. You'll see some interesting parallels here. Verse 7. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Look at this, verse 10. What's going on? People are almost singing. Loud voices in heaven. They got a lot to say. They're rejoicing. Verse 8. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It had raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. And they shall speak and say unto thee, Art thou become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials, and the worm is spread unto thee, and the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation of the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Now, I know, I am very well aware that there's a certain king being compared to Lucifer in that passage. I understand that. But it's still prophetically speaking of Satan. But it's also a little bit in the past tense, as if. Now, look, notice verse 12 where it says, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? When he fell in the Garden of Eden, or if he fell before creation, whatever you want to really believe, it's all right. I mean, personally, there's just so much controversy. I don't even blame you which position you take. What nations did he weaken? There wasn't any nations. Not really. Not yet. So this seems to be future, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people look at it as past tense. I believe it might be future. Anyways. Verse 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Satan is overcome by not only the blood of the Lamb by Jesus Christ, but Satan is ultimately defeated not just by that, but by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Satan is overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. The word of whose testimony? Jesus' followers. Jesus' born-again believers. Would Satan fall? Would Satan fallen? God's plan is complete. Verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. The heavens are rejoicing. You know, when we look at what's going on in heaven, and then we look on what's going on in earth, we find out just how out of tune earth is with heaven. Look what it says. Rejoice, ye heavens, but woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth he hath but a short time. Heaven rejoices that God's plan is being completed. The earth is suffering because Satan is going to fall onto it. It's the last place he can go to. And when his time is short, he gets mad. That's why he's kind of given some of us a fit. He's given us a fit. Because he knows his time is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And he's trying everything he can to discourage you. Remind him of his defeat once in a while. Verse 13. And when the dragon saw his cast in the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. That's his last target. If he can get Israel, he can make God to be a liar. If he can destroy Israel. That's his plan. To make God look like a liar, that he was not going to preserve the nation of Israel. He persecutes the woman. Notice it doesn't say he kills her. He does not succeed. He doesn't officially kill her. He persecutes her. He goes after her. Verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly in the wilderness into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the face of the serpent, 1260 days. One can make the joke, she was given an airplane, 2 wings of a great eagle. However, this can't be true. On the joking side here, an airplane is just a long tube with a bunch of demons. That's your Kenneth Copeland joke. I know, I put that in there because why not? So like the Exodus, Israel is led away from trouble and into the presence of God, who meets her in the wilderness. She will be fed and nourished and kept safe. However, Satan is not going down this easy. Verse 15. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. What is this water coming out of his mouth? Is there a little 7-headed serpent dragon breathing water out of his throat and trying to drown a giant woman? There's something symbolic here. Notice that the water comes out of his mouth. He tries to carry her away with the flood. Satan is a liar. He is a deceiver. He uses propaganda. He tries to cause people to turn on one another. If he can give enough lies of blasphemy, like a flood, to overtake Israel, he can cause her to lose her way. When Israel's looking for places in the wilderness to go to, you know what's going to probably happen? People are going to reject them. They're going to say, no, you can't stay here. We heard the news. We heard about what you Jews are, where you came from, what trouble you've been causing. Satan is going to make sure that Israel suffers beneath his lies. However, verse 16. And the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. This one's difficult. I don't really know what's going on here. It could represent that some on the earth will not heed the lies of Satan and will take in the fleeing Jews, perhaps. I don't know. That's my best one. But the lies of Satan will be hindering Israel's progress of fleeing to the wilderness. Verse 17, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Alright, so if Jews from Jerusalem are fleeing from Israel, it says he goes after the remnant of her seed. Who's that talking about? Is that talking about Gentiles? No, not necessarily. The remnant of her seed. The seed of Israel. These are Jews. Notice that they're not just Israel Jews. There are German Jews, Russian Jews, Polish Jews. There are Jews scattered all over the face of the earth. If Satan can't get the ones in Israel, he's going after the ones in the other parts of the world. He's going to take his anger out on them. Those that believe. The Jews that have not taken a mark yet. We'll be getting into that eventually, next chapter perhaps. But what we're seeing here is he goes after a remnant. Because Satan has learned one thing very important. Israel survives in remnants. A remnant of Israel survived the Babylonian captivity. There are plenty of times in Scripture throughout captivity and wars where Israel was a remnant. There was just a few left that made it. Joshua and Caleb made it out of the 40 years out of the wilderness. Remember? So a remnant. Now, of course, there were other Israelites with him, but most of them died. But everybody from that first generation seemed to have died in the 40 years of traveling. But Joshua and Caleb remained because they were faithful. There's always a faithful remnant. When the spies went out and said, we can't take the land, there's too many giants. 2, Joshua and Caleb said, we have the Lord, we can do this. But the other 10 said, we ain't got a chance. The remnant believed. The 2 of the 12. Now, if you look at the Greek of this verse, verse 17, something was left out. If you have a King James, there's something missing actually, because chapter 13, verse 1, part of it is incorporated into verse 17 of chapter 12. How John stands on the sand of the sea. The dragon stands on the sand of the sea with John. And eventually he sees what we will get into next time, Lord willing, next week, the 4 beasts of Daniel. And that's going to be interesting, because that's going to take a lot of looking at. Because those beasts can get confusing because they can be applied different ways. But that's next week. I will end the audio recording, and then we'll get to questions and prayer requests. For those of you listening online, thank you for tuning in to Revelation chapter 12. I hope you have a blessed day, and keep tuned in for our Revelation studies with Shelter for Believers.